Hello, folks. My name is Scott, and I am hosting the show you're watching right now, and where I go back to retrospect the movies from its original to its coming sequels as a review. And I'm starting this very episode with a movie I've heard is a really good movie, but never got around to it till a year ago. So, here we go. The movie I am discussing today is Trainspotting, starring Ewan McGregor, Ewan Bremner, Kevin McKidd, Johnny Lee Miller, Robert Carlyle, and introducing Kelly MacDonald, directed by Danny Boyle. And here's what he's best known for directing. If any of you don't know these movies, go check them out. And I should start off of how I know the movie. I'm actually a newbie. I've seen it a year ago. Don't remember too much about it. I've heard it over because of referenced in my life because I'm a big movie fan and all. And I think I heard the name because of a trailer or a poster somewhere around there of his 2003 film 28 Days Later. And I've been hearing of how other actors got to work with him. We're saying something about how inspired they got to work with him after seeing this movie. And let's get into this movie, into the brief plot synopsis, shall we? Ewan McGregor plays Mark Retton, an heroin addict, as well as his group of friends, Spud, Sick Boy. That is what they really do call him in the movie, surprisingly. Don't judge me for when I'm telling you this. Tommy and Begbie, they all smoke a hell of a lot of heroin, as well as party and have sex with girls, especially when Retton hooks up with a 14-year-old girl named Diane. Begbie is beating people up if anybody uses the restroom at the bar they usually go to, or if others get into each other's way. If you got in his way, he'll beat your ass. Let's move on. And now, Sick Boy loses his baby from having heroin around the baby and his wife, which is kind of depressing, I should say. Spud ends up going to prison for 6 months, and Retton wishes it was him. Because, let me just put this clearer. Spud goes to prison, and the judge lets Retton go. So it's kind of one of those complicated situations. Retton smokes one too many heroines, almost leading up to his death, and his mom and dad keep him locked up in his room for months. As Retton gets cleaned from his heroin problem, he goes out and lives his own with a job as a real estate agent, and doesn't regret his heroin days until Begbie comes back to his life, and he and Sick Boy are taking his television and his life when Tommy dies. And they go to his funeral and try to sell heroin with a rich man for $16 million, which, that's a little illegal, but okay, it's completely illegal. But I don't know where it is, but in the area of Scotland. But I know it's filmed in Scotland. I just don't know where that it would be legal in any other way in America. And they celebrate by drinking at a bar until Begbie beats up a guy, stabbing Spud in the hand by mistake. On the same night, Retton takes all the money, and Spud sees him and lets him go just by doing this. Or something, I couldn't remember. On his way to London, and leaves $1 million for Spud for making him go on his way to a new life, into a new chapter, as credits roll. Now, what surprised me about this movie mostly, it was just shot for 7.5 weeks with a budget of $35 million. Now, that would have been a really bad movie to start with if the actors made it sloppy or messed it up in any ways, but they didn't. What they used and shot in just one take was phenomenal performances to make a fantastic movie. It's an independent movie with its release of August of 1996. Ewan McGregor's monologue at the beginning was very moving, and I felt like it was believable that Ewan McGregor was going through some heroism issues, and I felt it coming into the movie. It does an incredible job for its pacing. For its 94 minutes, it's an hour and a half long. It was like when you were in the world and experiencing what they're going through together. No. Let's talk about the actors, shall we? I'm going to start with, let's say, Retton, played by Ewan McGregor. Interesting trivia. I heard Ewan McGregor lost 26 pounds to be in the role for only 2 months. When you watch the movie, McGregor looks like this. To what he looks like today, looking like this. Personally, I think his career went from the skinny photo to being a Jedi in Star Wars prequels, which I'll get to later this year, to a singer in Moulin Rouge, and to a pretty recently Disney character in Beauty and the Beast that came out, well, the original came out in the 90s. I'm talking about the Lumiere that he played in this new movie. But yep, that's all I gotta say about him, and I think he does a fantastic job of portraying a heroine act, and yeah, you got it. Now, the next character I gotta bring up is Spud, being played by Ewan Bremner. Spud is an interesting character because he has an arc, and from starting at the beginning of the movie where he was playing soccer with his friends against some team, to smoking heroin, to a man going to prison by the end of it, spoiler alert, to someone who got stabbed in the hand by Begbie at the last fight of his life, before we get to the sequel, which, ouch, that's gotta hurt. He did a phenomenal job how he looked with his facial expressions, and he acted with Ewan McGregor at the time for the new movie, not just for this one and the sequel, but he will be, which I'll be talking about the sequel next week, but when we get to next week's movie, he will be working with Ewan McGregor 5 different times, including these two, as well as some film, I forget the name of it off the top of my head, as well as Jack the Giant Slayer and Black Hawk Down. But I will be seeing him again without Ewan McGregor later this year in Wonder Woman for the DC Universe. So, let's move on to the next character, shall we? The next character I gotta bring up now is Sick Boy, being played by Johnny Lee Miller. Now, the first photo I had of him was his character, and the second one was his real-life personality. So, moving on, he's a little bit of an emotional character just because he had a baby with him who he got killed because of the heroin that he's been smoking around him. And poor baby will never see that day, the light of day again. Now, because he had the heroin on his face, it died off screen, which, too sad. And, interesting trivia, Miller's cousin in real life was obsessed with, well, his character, let me start with that. His character was obsessed with James Bond trivia, He has a grandfather named Bernard Lee who played M in the earlier James Bond movies before Judi Dench ever took the role. It's kind of actually pretty neat if you ask me. Okay, so I'll be brief, but Miller did the best work he could here, and he was great, and I'm looking forward to seeing him in the sequel next week. I'll just say that much. Next up is Tommy. Now, it's a shame that the character does die in the movie, but fortunately, the guy's still alive to this day. Even though I've seen this guy before, and he was Lord MacGuffin and Brave, and he was also in Percy Jackson and the Olympians, the Lightning Thief as the god Poseidon, but the character, I'm afraid, he's barely in the movie as much, but I don't know if he's too memorable enough for me to remember his face. I know he died, spoiler alert, because he's not going to be in next week's movie, which, kind of sad. And, I don't know, something about him just... He's a blonde, I know that much. from looking at the movie. So, moving on. Let's move on to Robert Carlyle, who plays the main antagonist, whose name is Begbie. Here's the photo. I'm afraid I only have one thing to say other than I think he did a good job, but this actor I've seen because I remember that he was a James Bond villain. Remember how I told you about Bernard Lee, who was M in the original? Well, it turns out 3 years later, he played a villain in Pierce Brosnan's 007 movie, The World Is Not Enough. He was a very menacing villain, and he does the same thing here, where he did a good job of portraying a selfish bastard. I've got to give him credit because he pulls off a villain very well, but overall, I don't think he's a great actor. I mean, he's a good actor in here, but not too much in general. But let's move on. We are on Diane, who is played by Kelly MacDonald, looking like first this to now looking like this. Now that I've seen this actress in a few other things, I'll start with the first one. I can name 3 roles that I can think she's most famous for. The first one I'm thinking is she was Josh Brolin's wife in No Country for Old Men. Let me show you what that looks like. As well as Helena Ravenclaw in Harry Potter and the Deathly Hallows Part 2. And some of you may know her as the voice of Princess Merida in Brave. Now let's be for real. She was 19 years old when she filmed this, and she was pretending to play a 14-year-old girl that Ewan McGregor had sexual intercourse with, which is illegal in all over the world. And another thing about her is that she was hired from handing out flyers across Glasgow and Scotland and auditioned for the role, and Danny Boyle was really impressed. And she got picked for the role as she was playing in this next week's movie. She, while filming sexual intercourse scene, she and Ewan McGregor had a scene that was sexual that had to be trimmed by a few seconds in the American version of the film. She seemed to be enjoying it too much, is the reason why Mr. Boyle, I feel like, had to cut 3 seconds of that out, or maybe 4. And there's one more thing about her I gotta bring up when the movie is released. It was released in August, somewhere around her 20th birthday of 1996. So yeah, that's what's going on with, now she's like in her 40s, I think, early 40s if I'm not mistaken. But, so let's get to my recommendations, shall we? Do I recommend this to people? Yes. If you're a fan of movies and want to see more fascinating things, check this out. And Danny Boyle, I'm a fan of you, and I have always enjoyed your filmography and will intend to make anything you make in the future if you're watching this. But I doubt you would be. But anyways, it's a great story. I hope the sequel is good. I heard it's semi-good, semi-bad. I can't explain it any further because I haven't seen the movie yet. But my rating of this movie would be an 8.6 out of 10. Thank you for joining me in discussing Trainspotting, and I will be back for next week when Trainspotting 2 comes out in limited releases in some places. I luckily have a theater that's nearby me that I can go check out the movie. So, until next time, choose life.